Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the TEDU conversation sessions. We have been using this platform since 2012 as a strategy to encourage conversations, to engage the public on matters of national relevance. For tonight's session, we will be discussing the foreign exchange challenges. And for this evening's session, I want to invite Dr. Anthony Gonzalez, who is our chair, to take over. Dr. Gonzalez, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Rebecca. And thanks again for having me. Let me first of all say a pleasant good evening to members of the panel and to all of those participating. On the last occasion, we started on this subject about economic and financial sustainability. And there we focused a lot on the macroeconomic and structural issues that relate to this question of sustainability. I think tonight we want to continue and look more at the foreign exchange aspect of it. You would no doubt agree that that is an aspect that is a bit worrisome, as we have seen in the last few months, a shortage of foreign exchange and a plethora of complaints about the state of the foreign exchange market. Now, this is an issue that has been going with us for quite a while, so we felt that it was necessary to have a panel, and we could find no other persons better than the five of you to discuss that this evening. We have Mr. Ved Sriram, who is a financial consultant as well as an entrepreneur. Ved is well known also. Yeah, he's a man of several parts. He's well known also in the field of journalism, and he's also a very interesting entrepreneur. I believe he's probably the only one still in the sugar industry, and he's able to survive in it. So quite a feat. So he's very interesting in terms of his views on some of these subjects. I've read quite a bit of his stuff. He publishes from time to time in the Sunshine newspaper, and we have some regular discussions on Chat Where I Am. So he has some very interesting views that I think we should hear. We then have Dr. Marlene Atz, who is a lecturer who is lecturing in the Department of Economics. Marlene is well known to all of you. She hardly needs any introduction. She founded the Sustainable Development Unit and has been active in sustainable development, as well as doing a number of interesting work with national and regional institutions. You probably would know her very well on the question of the budget. If you were here last time, you would hear in terms of her macroeconomic and structural views with respect to this subject. So welcome, Marlene, and it's a pleasure to have you here again this evening. We then have Professor Hossain, who is, of course, needs no introduction. He is the founder of this forum. And Professor Hossain, of course, lectures in international trade. He's very active in terms of research. He has put out a number of publications. He's involved in the world of consultancy and advocacy. So that I think if I talk too much, I may tend to really discredit his profile. So I will say no more. And then we have, I should apologize for Dr. Mohindra Tiwari. He was supposed to be here with us this evening, but unfortunately he can't. So we have to go without him. Those of you who were here last time would have heard him discuss this subject to some extent. He focused a lot on the educational aspect. We have also Mr. Vivek Sharan. Mr. Sharan, as you know, is the chairman of the Confederation of Regional Chambers of Commerce. He was formerly a businessman and he ran Sharan Bookstore, but he's well known publicly. I see from time to time his views are out there with respect to this question of foreign exchange, and he's well known in terms of the national issues. So basically, this is the panel we have, and we are hoping to have a brief discussion. When I say brief, it's probably going to go about 45, 50 minutes. I'm trying to see if we could get it done within that time frame so we could have at least 30, 40 minutes of discussion. So I'll give each panelist, except Mr. Siram, who will have 15 minutes. We'll give the other panelists 10 minutes, and then we'll break into a discussion from the comments that you have made in the chat or which you may wish to raise against any one of the commentators or the panelists. So let's begin, and let me start first by asking Mr. Veda Sitaran to do his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Sitaran. Check are you muted?
Yeah, I'm putting
Okay,
on my...
Yeah, we're hearing you now, yes. Good.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. 15 minutes is a short time to try and restructure the economy, so I'll be running through fairly fast.
Yes.
Our dependence on FX is very simple to evaluate. We all know what it is. Let's say if we are having breakfast, we have eggs, onion, and cheese. Onion are imported, cheese imported, toast, that's the wheat we import, butter we import, coffee imported, even Hong Wing, which I thought was local, and I bought it to support the local industry. That's what I found out. It was Brazilian coffee that they're packing. Milk imported, sugar imported. So I think the evidence with regards to without FX, we probably would not be eating breakfast as we know it. If we go for lunch, rice is imported, goat curry, that's imported, that's the goat and the spices. Vegetables might be local. If we have wine, that's imported. Dessert ice cream is imported. Question, what about local labor? That's interesting because the local labor, we might tend to classify it as a local content. But if the propensity to import is high, it means to say the local labor will also be demanding FX to support. So payment in TT dollars is really a call on FX. I think the economists will be able to really give us a better answer on that. If you look at our sources of FX, taxes from the sale of oil and gas and petrochemicals, government borrowings, income from investments. Government has investments abroad. Businesses as well as personal have investments abroad, and we do get. Whether that money actually flows into Trinidad is another question. The remittances, I checked remittances quite a number of years ago. It was about 144 million US dollars. I don't know what's it now. Sale of manufactured goods, yes, that brings us some US dollars. And I don't know if we are a donor recipient country, but may be very little grant that we'll be getting. If you look at uses though, our uses of consumer goods, machinery services, debt repayments, purchase of fuel now, which was never before when Petrotrin was in operation, but now we have to buy fuel, and that raises a very challenging situation that needs to be analyzed. We use for investments. Now, migrant payouts, and Roger has been raising this issue. What is the implications for Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago? And my feeling is that we are not only supporting an additional 10% of our population, so we have to find FX for that, but they are supporting communities in Venezuela as well. So the demand for FX has increased significantly as a result of migrants in Trinidad. If you look at global trends, I think all of us are familiar, wars and conflicts, Ukraine, Russia, Israel with Gaza, Azerbaijan with Armenia, that's a hotspot that is growing. China is fighting with all its neighbors, even Russia, who is known to be their friend. There's a regional conflict on that, territorial conflict on the northeast. No, currency wars. The currency wars has been going on for years. And what is the implication for Trinidad and Tobago? We need to find out. International trade, by bypassing the US, Saudi Arabia just accepted Chinese RMB for the sale of oil. In fact, the Iran has just closed a deal for 310 million tons, not barrels, tons of sale of oil to China in RMB. So that means to say that the demand for US dollars is shrinking. Now, BRICS countries established their own clearing system. They had a recent meeting and they said, why do one country have to buy US dollars to buy your goods and you have to buy US dollars to buy my goods? Can't we just come to some agreement with regards to exchange rates? So we are seeing the significant reduction of the US dollars, and that has implications for us because as US dollars, the demand for it falls, it means to say the value of it also falls. So we cannot ignore global trends and the implications for Trinidad and Tobago. Major economies on the brink. Whilst we do not hear it on the main news, but America is really living off monopoly money. And a major export really is printing money and selling it. So when they sell it for TT dollars, they can take TT dollars and buy whatever we can provide. And that is precisely a concern for America. And at the end of the day, at some time, the chicken comes home to roost. Germany is now called the sixth man of Europe. Citizens cannot afford, cities have run out of firewood. Back to medieval times. China housing and financial bubble, whilst they're doing significant construction outside of China, within China itself, there are serious issues with regards to their economy. And it is reported that they have over 100 million apartments that are vacant. So we have to look at that. Evergrande, the largest development company, has declared bankruptcy, and several other development company. China depends, their GDP depends 30% on the real estate sector, real estate development. So we have to watch it very carefully. The UK falling apart. Most citizens, that's the poorer class as well as the middle class, have to choose between rent and food. So those of us who are claiming for reparations of 33 million, I would not encourage them to keep up their hopes because they're not going to get it. With the German energy and financial problems, the whole of Europe is negatively affected because the German economy, the rest of Europe depends upon the health of the German economy. So if you look at financial market instability, the worst thing could have happened to the international global market is the increase in interest rates. But just imagine for a moment, America, that is the US government, is paying 5% on their debt, short term as well as medium and long term, a little less on the long term. Trinidad and Tobago government, we are not paying that kind of rates, at least with the savings rate in America has also increased, but saving rates in Trinidad remains below 1%. And that's a major structural problem that has to be addressed by central bank. Now, with doubling of mortgage rates in the States and Canada and other parts of the world, you're going to find a tremendous amount of default. And how all of that happens is going to impact on the economic lifestyles and economic conditions of those countries. Now, one of the fallout of increased interest rate is that your bond portfolio also decreases in value. And that is where the banks now, they are actually dumping bonds and incurring significant losses. Just my battery is running low. We're trying to fix it. This is a major structural problems in the developed capital markets. And we also have a bit of it here in some of the banks. They borrow short, they invest long. You borrow short at very low interest rate, you invest long at much higher interest rates, and you are happy when things are stable. When interest rates start to rise, those banks run into serious profitability problems. And that is why I would expect, and many analysts expect, that the banks to fall, a lot of bank closures within the next 12 months. What is the implication for Trinidad and Tobago? Where do we have the savings? When rates rise, value of fixed income securities decline. and there's contagion risk. Derivatives is in the amount of trillions of dollars. We do not know, even the regulators do not know the extent of that market. Michael Burry, you probably hear the name. He shorted this market for $1.6 billion. Warren Buffett expects a market crash. Author of Rich Dad Poor Dad, he has been saying for many years, look, expect a market crash. But Ray Dalio, he's the manager and founder of the largest hedge fund with assets in over $124 billion, is betting on the crash of the market. And this begs the question, where do we have our savings? Now, growing food shortages, we know about it. We experience unusual climate changes. It's either too hot, too dry, or too wet. 20 countries already banned the export of food. India has taken the lead and banned the export of rice, and they were the major supplier of rice. UN warns of hell on earth with regard to food shortages. So I do not think we can close our eyes to these events and these forecasts. Suppose, on a worst case, shipping lockdown affect export of oil, gas, and import of food and goods. And that's possible for the simple reason we had the experience of the lockdown for COVID-19. And we saw the impact in terms of trade and transportation. Now, the partial lockdown will render scarcity and high prices, decline in the value of the HSF, food scarcity and steep rise in food prices, declines in remittances. Obviously, if our family abroad are not in a healthy financial position, they're not going to remit to us. Government loss of revenues and its inability to pay debts, loss of revenues and inflows, great scale. From a small country in the Pacific, Nauru, and I would urge the audience to read about it, because they were at one point the second wealthiest country in the world on a per capita basis, and now they're stark destitution. These are two fallacies we have to be mindful of. Increase in oil prices is good for this country, and I'm saying that the increase, that we need to work out a financial model to show where oil prices rise to 100, what is the impact on our imports of fuel. So at some point that we may, with a increase in the price of oil, we would have to dip into our pockets and saving to meet the import of gas, of petroleum. The other fallacy, we believe Feds are increasing rates to curb inflation. The other main reason, I suspect, is to curb the run on US dollar bonds, so that by increasing the rates, they'll be able to, the demand for US bonds will increase. And that I think is the main reason. Imagine Trinidad for a moment, and this we need to do the exercise. No income from oil and gas. And this for the moment, this would be an intellectual exercise, but would have serious implications how we structure the economy going forward. No income from oil and gas, no FX earning, significant decline in government revenues, government cannot service debt, IMF steps in, government forced to cut expenditures and subsidies, export manufacturers are no longer competitive because of the lack of subsidies, and this has to be answered. Government tax base further decline, population can no longer afford any more taxes, discretionary income decline, income further shrink, and no FX to import food and essentials. Is there a probability of this? Is there a possibility? And what is the likelihood given the events on the global market? We do not have time to contemplate. We need to develop an alternate structuring of the economy and act very fast. So the strategy I would recommend is preserve savings and reserves, ensure control of countries' FX, restructure and diversify the economy, wisely use our savings to deepen the economy. Export manufacturing, I have a question there, whether that will serve us well in the new dispensation. Look at import substitution to save FX and develop local industries. Preserving savings and reserves. Ensure investments are not at undue risk. Should we be in the US investments at this point in time? Should we skew portfolio to money market, precious metals, etc., and get out of the equity market and the bond market? Is government making the best use of its assets? Bill Gates just bought 270,000 acres of land in America, and he's growing potatoes for McDonald's. What is government doing with its large land holding? That is a question that must be asked and must be answered. Central bank and government to ensure prudent use of FX and fair market.
Seem to have lost. Yes, we seem to have lost Mr. Siram. Is he back? Are you back, Mr. Siram? Hello? He's not. Yeah. Are you
Hi.
there?
Hi, Professor. Yeah, I had to change the computer.
Okay. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. We're here.
Rebecca, just let me know how much more time I have, please.
Yes, you have about 4 minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah. To restructure. I'm nearly at the end, Professor.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying preserve savings and reserves, right? Now, central bank, the duty is on central bank to do a lot of things. Central bank is to ensure prudential lending guidelines. The financial assets for more, what the banks are doing, they're lending people more than 100% to buy cars. And when they go into non-performing loans, what happens? The cars are just thrown aside. And so we are wasting FX. Based on countries' needs, limit the imports of vehicles and machinery. Government to introduce very heavy progressive taxes on high-end vehicles. That's my recommendation. Government to establish a list of negative list for imports to reduce the demand for many products, right, and protect the local industries. Government to devalue the TT dollars. I'm recommending that because it's happening in any way. It's going to happen. But what happens with a negative listing is for imports is to reduce the demand and protect the local industries. Government to devalue the TT at a fixed rate. Do not let it float. Do not let it float at all. We're going to run into problems. Government is to extend vehicle replacement for government officers and so on for 5 years. The parliamentarians, I think they could do it every 2 or 3 years, and that's the most profitable car dealership in Trinidad and Tobago, Parliament. Government to establish special unit to review all financing proposals to ensure treasury of central bank and state enterprises are not pilfered. There's too much evidence where we lose money because of improper financing. Export financing, my view on that is very, very simple, is that we need to do an exercise to show that that sector, without subsidies, can they survive and can they export? If they cannot survive, then we are supporting the wrong sectors in Trinidad. Restructuring the economy, FX reserves, this is what we have. Some FX reserve, fertile lands, good rainfall, tropical, etc. But we have a lot of waste. So we should establish some objectives. That's a country. Food security within 5 years. Maximum use of local resources. Create sustainable jobs. Immunize the economy from international price supply variations. We must do it. How to do it? I'm looking at agriculture. This would have been my focus. There would be others. Others would include agriculture, agro-processing, recycling, micro-industries, and local tourism. The last one is extremely important for us to live quality life. Support agriculture by appropriate action. Ban the sale of FX for a list of agricultural produce. Give local farmers the confidence to grow food. Establish joint venture agro-processing plants and give farmers. Now, for example, I'm just going to the end of the slide. Growing chicken feed for local industry. We import too much chicken feed. We can grow sorghum, we can grow other grains to support the chicken industry, because the component of external of FX, foreign input into that industry is very, very high. We can produce local cassava syrup for the beer processing plant, produce local molasses for Angostura. So all these things can be done locally, but we have to give it the importance. Eat what we grow and grow what we eat. That should be the mantra going forward. Replace wheat with rice flour and black gram, that is urdi dal. Use corn flour instead of wheat. Establish prices. So there are many things to promote local industry and local crops, right? So, with regards, we should establish this as a priority as well. Within the next 3 to 5 years, we should be self-sufficient in rice, sugar, coffee, cocoa, sorghum, that's for feed, coconut oil, milk production. We used to produce 11 million liters of milk. Now we're producing less than one. Cheese and butter, we can manufacture all of that here. Mutton and related meats. Why are we importing mutton and goat meat from as far as New Zealand? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I am agro-processing mini plants. We should have to look at that. Um, Recycling is a major component to diversify the economy. I'll show you. I've researched the cost of establishing a 200 ton per day plant to recycle scrap iron. 200 ton a day plant is established, fully established, 15 million US dollars. Do you know how much money we will save? At the moment, we're exporting all our raw materials and then we're re-importing it in way of finished goods. What is the value of shipping in that process? We can save all the shipping costs and do it right here, right? Tire recycling, tire recapping, gasifiers to convert vegetation to fuel and generate electricity, paper recycling, plastic recycling. Recycling, we should set up a ministry known as Ministry of Recycling, focus on it, establish objectives, and get that done. Micro industry, sugarcane bottling juice, it's costing 20,000 US dollars. We can take that out and as an experiment and just get it done and feed. We have 200,000 meals we have to prepare every day for the school feeding program. We can say, okay, we can do sugarcane juice instead of soft drink, candle making, soap. There's a variety that is available of small micro industries we can implement in Trinidad and Tobago. Local tourism, this is my last, recreational parks. We can't keep our society without the possibility and the avenues for recreation and family gatherings and so on. All those lakes that we have vacant at Caroni, at Petrotrin, all those things could be converted to parks. We can encourage homestays and different areas in Trinidad so the family can take, the parents can take the family on weekends and so on. We should be planting 100 acres of exotic trees. We have around 12 baobab trees in Tobago where tourists actually seek out, and I have planted baobab trees. We can get the real exotic types of trees from around the world, including the ones from Madagascar, and plant it here. Take 100 acres at first, and we have a fantastic park that would be in a few years be an attraction for tourism. So thank you for, I may have crossed my time a bit. There was a lot I had to say. Thank you, and that's the end of my presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Siram. I think certainly you have raised a number of controversial issues, both in terms of your analysis and in terms of your recommendations. It's a pity that you didn't have more time because I realized that you have spent quite a lot of time in going into the details. But it was very interesting listening to you because I think you come to this subject from the point of view of a practitioner, a person who in the field and who can probably say something very relevant in terms of how we deal with some of these issues. Let me move on now to Dr. Atz. Dr. Atz, could you make your presentation?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts this evening. And I think Mr. Siram set the stage, and I will kind of use the opportunity to put some context. So the title of this evening's conversation is An Assessment of Economic and Financial Sustainability, Meeting the Forex Needs. And I want to add my own subtitle to that, Rethinking Our Approach to the Allocation of Scarce Forex Resources, Basic Economics 001, the study of how you allocate scarce resources among unlimited ones. And I think that is where we are in Trinidad and Tobago. And I was quite interested in some of the recommendations from Mr. Siriram, because I think it takes us back to conversations that some of us have been having with governments over the decades in terms of how do we control the appetite for foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. This evening's contribution really is going to cover 3 issues. I think it's important for us, even as we're dealing with the convulsions in the foreign exchange market now, I think it's important for us to have some historical context. So I want to start by positioning where we are in terms of our exchange rate policy in Trinidad and Tobago. How did we get to where we are? Looking at some of the numbers in terms of the demand versus the supply of foreign exchange, and then just closing off, looking at this state of disequilibrium in which we find ourselves, and in fact, embracing some of the recommendations from Mr. Siriram, but certainly advocating that we need to do things differently moving forward. So some of the people in the audience may or may not be aware that, you know, our history in terms of the foreign exchange goes back some time. So our foreign exchange, features of our foreign exchange market in Trinidad and Tobago is that we have a small number of foreign exchange suppliers, and the earning for the foreign exchange comes primarily from the energy sector. The central bank has a pivotal role in terms of how we manage the availability of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course the exchange rate. So government gets energy-related taxes and royalties in foreign currency, and then the central bank essentially takes control of these, and the central bank then in turn makes it available to the rest of the country. Commercial banks are the major conduit through which people can access foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. We repealed the Foreign Exchange Act in 1993. So all exchange controls, those of us who were around before that time would know where we had exchange rate controls, the EC0 system, et cetera, et cetera. In 1993, the exchange controls were repealed in Trinidad and Tobago. So controls on current and capital transactions were abolished, and the dollar was allowed to quote unquote float at that time. The floating lasted for about 4 years, and during that period, the dollar depreciated substantially. And this graph that I have here kind of chronicles the history of Trinidad and Tobago's exchange rate policy and what had happened. So when we abolished the controls in 1993, we floated for about 4 years, and the exchange rate actually fluctuated significantly. But since 1997 or thereabouts, we've been pegged at about 6.3. And in principle, the exchange rate was market determined, but because of the volatility of our inflows of foreign exchange coming predominantly from the energy sector, coupled with what we call some market imperfections, special arrangements were put in place in terms of how we manage the exchange rate in Trinidad and Tobago. So the central bank, as I mentioned earlier, is a key player in terms of how we manage the exchange rate market in Trinidad and Tobago, and the central bank intervenes into the market, you know, occasionally to ensure that we keep the exchange rate within a particular band. So where we are now in 2023 is that the exchange rate is hovering somewhere around 6.78 TT dollars to $1 USD, and that is a function of some of the interventions made by the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. This graph shows where our foreign exchange comes from, and the red bars, and it's not meant to be rude, but the red bars are really for effect. The red bars showing that the energy sector, so energy exports, which is predominantly where we're getting the inflows of foreign exchange. So these data are from 2011 to 2022. The spike we're seeing in 2022 is really a bit of an anomaly because it's as a result of the geopolitical conflict, Russia and Ukraine, causing some spike in terms of energy prices, and Trinidad and Tobago benefiting from that. But we know it is not a secret. All of our government ministers have, in fact, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, they have spoken at length in terms of the challenges the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago is facing in terms of lower production, volatility in terms of pricing. So we've not been enjoying a significant inflow in terms of foreign exchange from the energy sector. Some inflows from non-energy exports, but certainly not as significant as the red bars, and the red bars are from the energy sector. So that is where we're getting the bulk of the foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. As I said, the 2022 spike was the anomaly caused by the geopolitical conflict in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. This slide is also interesting, and I apologize for the kaleidoscope of colors, but a picture paints 1,000 words, they say. So this is really what we are importing. The red bars show the total imports. The orange bars, or the middle bars, show the imports of fuel. So this data series goes back from 2013 to 2022. The importation of fuel, and of course the yellow bars are the other imports. And the red bars really is the aggregate, the total of the orange and the yellow bars. So we're seeing that in 2013, for example, look at the call out here, we were importing $5 billion worth of other items, and that will be food, that will be reinsurance payments, that we have all of those things that we're importing, cars, consumables, all of the things that we're importing. In 2013, we were importing about $5 billion worth of items. And in 2022, our import bill is more or less the same in terms of this particular category. So as I said, the orange bars, just to recap, the orange bars are for fuel imports, the yellow bars are for all of the other things that we import. And this shows essentially our consumption of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. The red bars, as I said, the red bars is really the total of the orange and the yellow. So if we wish, we can actually look at the red bar in 2013, which was just over $9 billion in 2022, when we have significantly lower inflows of foreign exchange. It's just about $7.5 billion in terms of imports that we're looking at in Trinidad and Tobago, US dollar, in US worth, as it were, in terms of imports. Where is all of the demand coming from? And again, I apologize for the kaleidoscope of colors, but I think it's important. So these data coming out of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago essentially shows the distribution of sales of foreign exchange to the public. So the commercial banks sell foreign exchange to the public, and it's it's either over the counter, the commercial banks, businesses, SMEs, the manufacturing sector, persons who are importing cars, all of the things that we consume. This is looking at the distribution of sales of foreign exchange. So we're demanding foreign exchange, and this is the breakdown of where that demand is going. So in 2018, roughly 27% of foreign exchange went to credit cards. So these light blue, however you're seeing it, grayish bars, is really credit card use. And I want to make the point that this is over $20,000 US consumption. So this is not buying things on Amazon Prime, unless you do an awful lot of shopping on Amazon Prime. This is in excess of US $20,000. So this means that persons are perhaps traveling and swiping their credit cards or importing things to resell and using their credit cards. So in 2018, 27% of the distribution of sales of foreign exchange distribution of sales of foreign exchange, Forex, was for credit card usage. In 2023, January to July in 2023, that is now at 37%. Bear in mind that we have a decline in terms of energy revenues, which is the primary source of revenues and source of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. The orange bars look at retail and distribution. In 2018, 31.8%, 32% of the sales of foreign exchange in excess of $20,000 was for retail and distribution. It's about 19-20% for the period January to July 2023. In 2022, it was about 22%. In 2021, 26%. This is when I think we really started to experience the tightness in terms of the availability of the foreign exchange. Let's look at another color palette. The green is the manufacturing sector. In terms of their demand, they're purchasing a foreign exchange in excess of 20,000. So we just have data for 2018 and then some small sales to the for manufacturing in 2022. Automobiles, not significant inside of here, but then you have all of the other. And I try to get some sense of what the other included, and the other includes everything else, including the kitchen sink. So that will include any kinds of purchases to facilitate reinsurance that might be done. It might include other kinds of purchases that are taking place. But this essentially, this color palette is showing how we are demanding and how we are using foreign exchange across credit card usage, retail and distribution, manufacturing, energy companies. The light blue at the top, energy companies also are in fact using foreign exchange. And remember, just to note that this is all sales of foreign exchange to the public in excess of anything above 20,000 US. So this is the year 2018, 2019, etc. Interestingly enough, Mrs. Sira made the point about foreign exchange required for debt servicing by the government. And I had included, among my slide deck, domestic versus external debt for Trinidad and Tobago. And as we see, domestic debt is in fact increasing for Trinidad and Tobago, but there is the external debt, which is the blue bars. And of course, this debt has to be serviced. The interest payments and those debt for those debt incurred has to be serviced in foreign exchange. Again, another interesting dimension of the demand for foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. So having put up those slides and given what I identified as the subtitle, as it were, for my presentation, for my contribution to the conversation this evening, whether or not we need to rethink the model in terms of our management of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. We know the central bank, as I indicated, in terms of the historical context for what is happening with foreign exchange. The central bank intervenes, but it is clear that there are market distortions, and these are not conducive to sustainability. If it is that the source of our foreign exchange is a sector that is subject to much volatility, and that is not a secret, this is not up for debate. The energy sector is experiencing a lot of volatility, coupled with declines in production. It means that we are going to be challenged in terms of our foreign exchange earnings. So something has to give. And the point that I want to make, and I think it's a good segue from Mr. Siram's contribution with some very specific things that he identified in terms of things like the negative list, exchange controls, devaluation, etc. I'm saying that the market conditions that we are experiencing now require us to, first of all, embrace the changes that we're seeing, understand what is happening in terms of the foreign exchange market, both in terms of demand and supply. And we certainly have to rethink the model in terms of how we are managing our foreign exchange, both from the demand side and also the supply side in Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to stop there with those initial thoughts. And I look forward to having the conversation in terms of how do we move forward, looking at sustainability, looking at economic and financial sustainability in Trinidad and Tobago in the context of foreign exchange, and how do we rethink our approach to the allocation of these scarce forex resources. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Hatz. I think your contribution follows nicely from what Mr. Siram said. This question of management is critical in terms of how we go forward. And you have raised a number of interesting issues, which I hope we get a chance to come back to them as we go into the final session with some discussion. Let me move on because we are having a slight problem of time now. Let me move on to Professor Hossain. Professor Hossain, yes, could you make your intervention, please?
Hi, Prof. Do you need to unmute your mic?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we're hearing you. Yeah, we're hearing you now, Roger. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So you would get some time from me, Prof. Gonzalez. I can't add anything to what Vade said and Marlene said. Two very good presentations. I have a couple of questions for both of them. I know Marlene has to leave early, so maybe we would want to give her the questions before she goes and give her a chance to answer. Either way, I am going to mainly reflect on this diagram here. This diagram here is the substantive problem in the Trinidad and Tobago economy that we are facing. The economy at around 1996 was at a point such as A.
Hi, Prof. Can you put it on presentation mode?
Yes,
Our
sorry.
audience might see it a lot better.
Right. The economy in 1996 was at a point such as A. And then, as you all know, we got this big natural gas boom. And the production possibility capabilities drifted outwards from production possibility frontier 1 to production possibility frontier 2. And at B, we started to experience, this is where the Dutch disease started to come into the economy, the challenge of managing plenty. And there was a slow shift in the structure of fiscal expenditures that in turn led to a change in the allocation of factors of production in the economy. So that the change in fiscal expenditures would have led to an increase in consumption of non-tradable goods and services vis-a-vis tradable goods and services, where on the horizontal axis I am showing tradable goods and on the vertical axis non-tradable goods. And at point C, which is where the economy drifted towards, you then had a decline in the labor force participation rate in the economy. So the economy moved from point C to point D. What Wade and Marlene outlined in terms of their policy recommendations, which I agree with, is the movement from point D to point E. And the critical thing to note about point E in relation to the origin and point A in relation to the origin and point D in relation to the origin is that they all represent different structures of production. Now, at a point such as E, because of the Venezuelan presence in the Trinidad and Tobago economy, so you move from D to E. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. You move from D to E because natural gas production started to fall from 4,400 MMCF per day in 2010 down to about 2681 as we speak. But at the same point in time, and Wade was very clear, at the same point in time, there was an inflow from about 2015 to about 2023 of the numbers I use is 120,000 Venezuelans into Trinidad and Tobago. And I got those numbers from various online commentators and I synthesized them and I use 120. Let's call it 60,000. Which it is not, but let's call it 60,000. Wade was clear in saying that these people, they have the same consumption habits as Trinidad and Tobago nationals, or probably have a consumption habit because they would want things from Venezuela that involve more of an import propensity than the average Trinidadian. Yes, it will be less in level, but in terms of proportion of foreign exchange use, they probably, because I know they like this, some of you all may know it better than me, this one flower, kind of particular flower that they use. I forgot the name. Come on, see this. I will find out for it, and just now one I would say. And then they also remit. So we are seeing a situation where the economy at point E as compared to A or B or C or D, which is 1996, 2014, 2017, and 2023, has a higher non-tradable sector as compared to tradable sector. Now, when you look at the data, and I saw Marlene took a look at the data, I took a look at the data, I used some definitions for imports. We don't import as much luxuries as some of the other Caribbean countries, so we are not greedy for foreign exchange. We have to be. So is it that this is a demand problem, and you know, Trinidad and Tobago nationals, they're just greedy and buying a set of foreign products in more than in proportion than other countries? I looked at the data and I'm not seeing that. Is it that so we are not a country that is importing more luxury goods than other countries as a proportion of our income? The fundamental challenge is, how do we move the economy from point E anywhere along the horizontal line labeled E to F? Any other, now of course, if we could get it moving back to B or anywhere to the lower than F, that is excellent. That's going to be a little challenging right now, given the situation with our gas production. And I spoke to Kevin Ramnarine this week, and I saw where he said by 2028, and I have great confidence in his numbers, we could reach by 2028 2,200 MMCF per day. I mean, that is a very bad situation. Now, how do we move from E to F? Marlene outlined several ways. I was very impressed with the amount of ways that Wade mentioned, and it shows that he also went into some of the areas and actually did some rough numbers and was talking about sorghum and the baobab tree and recreation and different ways, different things can happen. I won't belabor you all with that. I would simply, you know, I have outlined a few myself, focused on services exports, manufacturing exports, and other areas that we could change, that I would leave with you all, that I think if we were to follow this, we have a high probability of overcoming the foreign exchange situation. But what is more important, what is critically important in my understanding of the facts, is the geometry of how we do this. So unless policymakers, they have a good working knowledge, unless they sit with their relevant folks at the Ministry of Trade and the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Finance, and they go through the geometry of this and then calculate how to move from E to F and work out the import substituting things that Wade and Marlene would have mentioned, the manufacturing exports that Wade and Marlene would have mentioned, the service exports that Wade and Marlene would have mentioned. Of course, there are two other ways, or a few other ways we could get foreign exchange. And we are in a serious situation. We need to go after remittances so hard that it is not funny. I think we had asked what was our current remittance flow. I think you call a number of one something. It's about 242 million, if I remember correctly. But the point is, we need to go after it and try to increase that fivefold within a 3-year period. No small talk. Set an agenda, say 3 years, and try to increase remittance inflows fivefold. So anyway, I see Prof. Gonzalez is watching his phone. I am good there, Prof. Gonzalez. The slides would be with the audience, and that's my contribution. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much, Professor Hossain. I think you raised some interesting issues here, because you've tended to put the emphasis more on the supply side, let's say, as compared to VED, who emphasize much more the demand side. And it's an interesting perspective, and I'm hoping that we can come back to it in the discussion. But we are running short of time and we need to move on. So I would now like to ask Mr. Vivek Sharan to make his contribution. Over to you, Mr. Sharan.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for making me a part. I was very happy to be here. I think this discussion about Forex is critically important for many of the SMEs. Now, moving quickly along, I listened, intently to what the previous speakers were saying. I looked very much at some of the graphs that Dr. Atz had produced. One of the things that I really want to jump to is that graph of our economic rents that we collected from natural gas rents from that period, let's say 2010, I think it is, to 2022. That was what I got from the World Bank. As we can see, the economic rents have really been declining. I mean, this is not unknown to many people, particularly economists, but many of you at UV and so on. These graphs are there. Dr. Hussain has done multiple graphs and so on, and multiple presentations based on this. The fact of the matter is that our natural gas supply has been in decline since I think about 2012, and with that would be all those things, particularly government revenue that is obtained not only from oil rents but also natural gas rents. So that's just a frame situation. If we can move on to the other slide. Dr. Atz also mentioned this, which is, when we listen to what is being said about Forex, particularly the users of Forex, there are two major categories that tend to be quote unquote blamed for our present situation when it comes to Forex, which is, and those two categories are credit card users, which includes, small and medium businesses or businesses that utilize their credit card to buy goods. And also credit cards and, and then small and medium businesses also blamed because they're the ones who it is said, utilize, so much Forex because of all these things that they import and then sell as retail and so on. But what I want to show with this cross-border debt with the government and so on, and again, such graphs are not uncommon. They're not hard to find. It's easy to find that many of the economists have also, posted this thing. Dr. Hussain again has spoken about it many times. The fact of the matter is the government's external debt is increasing, and what you need to realize is that external debt by the government needs to be paid back in foreign currency. Whether that foreign currency is euros, whether that foreign currency is in US dollars, that is a fact. And that foreign currency, and that foreign debt is continuing to grow. So when we ask ourselves, from that pool of Forex that the government earns from its revenues, from its Forex revenues, derived mainly from the energy sector, what does it do with it, right? So if we're saying, well, it gives a certain amount to the central bank at an injection in central bank, then sells that or gives that to the commercial banks and so on. The reality of the situation is that the government's usage of the Forex that is earning has also been steadily increasing, and not at a small rate, over a series of years. If we may move on to the other slide, Rebecca, thank you. Now what we're looking at is when we look at, now despite this, so if we frame it again, so we're looking at natural gas supply dwindling since 2012. We're looking at economic rents from oil and natural gas also falling since 2012 as it. We're also looking at government debt rising, external debt rising at this time. We look at merchandise imports during the period. We see that it's also falling. So we're hearing that the demand for Forex is more. We're hearing that more Forex is being demanded and more Forex is being used by the economy. But the reality is that how can more Forex continue to be used when the supply of Forex has also been falling continually since 2012? And I'll speak very quickly about that in a minute. If we may move on to the other graph, the one with food imports.
Imports? Yeah, no problem, Vivek. Go ahead. I'll put it up in a second.
Right. So if we look at this next graph, and it's really about the food imports into Trinidad and Tobago, both the line and then after we'll look at the bar. What we're seeing with the food imports into Trinidad and Tobago is we're seeing an astronomical rise in food imports into Trinidad and Tobago. Now, we may see this on a graph and we look at it generally and say, what does this mean? This means that our food import bill is increasing. Yes, we understand. This means that, there are more there. So there's the graph, so we can see, the rate of increase, as it were, over the years. What it also means is this speaks towards a category of type of business. So when we talk about retail and distribution, the amount of forex that goes toward retail and distribution, we tend to believe, well, this may be the majority of smaller business. This may be many, many other types of business. But the reality is, when the central bank puts out a number and says, this is the usage of forex by the retail and distribution sector, it seems quite small in comparison to many of the others. But when we look at this graph, what it tells us is that over the years, more food is being imported into Trinidad and Tobago. And this category of food is actually very wide. It is not simply, necessities or staples. What we also have to understand is that looking at this, we also need to understand the growth of food distributors, the growth of food importers, and the growth of that sector of the economy, which is food distribution, and with it, those companies that import food into Trinidad and Tobago, and how well they have been doing. But also, their forex demand would also have had to have been increasing, over the years, against this backdrop of let's say a fall in the supply of forex during this time. Now, if we move on to that final graph, Rebecca, please. That's the bar graph with the food importation. Right, the bar graph with the food importation also gives you another perspective on how how the growth of food imports has really increased astronomically over the years. Now, I want to make a brief reference to 2015, at which time it was like 2 years after we started to see that a noticeable fall in supply of forex. And for the first time, the business community came out and they started to complain about, we can't get enough forex. We can't get enough forex. And the then central bank governor, Jawala Rambran, came out, spoke about it. Famously, he was eventually fired for the names he was named. But it gave us a snapshot at that point in time, beyond CSO data or beyond data that was published. It gave us a snapshot of the amount of forex that was used at that time, which is, let's say, 2012 to 2015, which was its 3-year period. So we're looking over a 3-year period of the top 3 people, the top 3 companies at that time in distribution and retail, using something like almost a billion US dollars over 3 years. When we look at manufacturing, 430 million over 3 years. When we look at cars and car dealerships, almost 500 million over 3 years. When you divide that by 3, you get an idea of the amount of usage. And that, in a snapshot, shows you what, at the very highest end of Trinidad, in terms of business in Trinidad and Tobago, at the very highest end, at the largest end of business in Trinidad and Tobago, in terms of size, the amount of forex that is also used by them. If we move so many years onto 2023, and we look again, and we bear in mind the graph I showed you about how food imports have been increasing and so on. And we look also at the growth of many of the other, the larger companies in Trinidad and Tobago. We cannot say that this forex usage has abated to any extent. And so when it is, I hear as someone who represents small and medium businesses, credit card usage is the major culprit, and the idea is to let's clamp down on credit card usage, which was done. Or that SMEs are one of the problems as well too, because they're highly inefficient, because all these people who have SMEs is really retail, and they just import goods into the country and sell it to everyone else. So, when we talk about the control of forex, we need to control forex. But then when we talk about controlling forex, I must say that I believe the forex is really controlled on the lower end of the spectrum, which is credit cards and what is given to SMEs, but not on the higher end of the. And people might think that that's sensational by me saying that, but I really do believe that that may be the case in that scenario. So again, moving forward, Dr. Arts had put up the graph and we looked at 2020 to 2021 and how Forex was used. And it's quite interesting to me because if you remember, during 2020 to 2021 was the lockdown years in Trinidad and Tobago because of the COVID crisis, 2020, 2021 COVID crisis. Half of 2022 COVID crisis, we were coming out of the crisis. What that meant was that every single business, other than the essential businesses, which were manufacturing, supermarkets, pharmacies, medical supply companies, every other business in Trinidad and Tobago was shut down for almost 2.5 years. And not only that, but the cost of importing items into Trinidad and Tobago was astronomical. From the Far East in particular, from China and so on, even from America, which in itself was shut down and it caused, a lot of delays and so on. So the idea that many small and medium businesses were importing or utilizing Forex during that period, 2020 to let's say first half 2022, I would have to disagree with that. So the majority of Forex that might have been used by the economy at that time would have been by these essential businesses and so on. So when we talk about, how do we deal with Forex and Forex usage? There are many aspects to it. Another aspect of that, which I haven't heard anybody speak about, is that of multinational companies other than the energy company. The great thing about the energy companies is the energy companies are able to sell us Forex. And when they can't sell us Forex because they receive bad bonds, as was the case, this year, it also, exacerbated the shortage that we have. But when we talk about multinationals, we must understand that all multinationals must repatriate their profits in US dollars. If multinational revenues are increasing in Trinidad and Tobago and they're earning more TT dollars, then obviously the amount that needs to be repatriated will be greater, and that repatriation must come from that pool of Forex that is being either, that is being supplied in Trinidad and Tobago, earned by the government or otherwise. Another case in point is that while we have many exporters exporting Forex, the reality is, what happens to those export inflows in terms of revenue, those Forex revenues that are earned by people who are exporting? Is that banked within Trinidad and Tobago, and do they still go back to the commercial banks and to the Exim Bank in order to get their Forex to bring in their supplies, as it were, or their raw materials and so on? Or do they actually use the Forex that is earned? Because that is key. If you're an exporter and you're having and you're earning revenues in US dollars, then to a certain extent that that earnings is supposed to assist in alleviating over time your usage of Forex. If that does not occur, and there's no laws or rules or anything that says that has to occur, then it doesn't really alleviate the problem. Another situation is that the government is asking for a long time, become an earner of Forex. For me to become an earner of Forex, for small and medium businesses to transition perhaps from retail, let's say, and distribution, to exporting and so on, which may have a manufacturing component in it. When I've actually investigated this, both on a personal level and so on, while it is the right thing to do, while I've heard Dr. Hussain say on many occasions, let us use the e-tech parks and so on, I have to say today that I'm pretty sure that if 50 or 60 SMEs next year decide that we are going to manufacture and we want a space in the e-tech parks that are presently in Trinidad and Tobago, find a space in the e-tech parks with which we can put our plant or equipment to begin to manufacture, they will not find a space. Space in the e-tech parks are at a premium, and there aren't many left. The second thing is that when we talk about going into an e-tech park, we're thinking about going into a park, as it were, in which there's a ready-made building and so on, and that's not the case. When you lease a space in an e-tech park, you're leasing a property. You're leasing land, sorry, not a property. And then it's upon you to erect a property on it, which further complicates things in a sense. So, there's when we talk about solutions, there's often the theory of the solution that is possible, but the execution of the solution, there's a huge gap sometimes between what is postulated as a solution, and what may be postulated as a solution may actually be very feasible. But how is there, is that infrastructure for that solution and in place? And the answer to that the infrastructure existing may not be may not be efficient enough, or it may not have the capacity to actually do what you want it to do. And so when we look at the environment now for business in Trinidad today, we're looking at minimum wage has increased, rightly so, many people have said. We look at electricity rates increasing, industrial as well, which people see, have a problem with. We looked over the years of fuel subsidy being removed and so on, which many people agreed with. I agreed with that as well too. The reality is that what we're seeing is that greater and greater costs have to be borne by business. And when you look at startups and when you look at transitions from being an importer retailer to being a manufacturer exporter or an exporter of any sort, then you're looking at high barriers, where really and truly what you're calling for should not have high barriers if you want that amount of movement from one thing to the next, which is not an easy thing you're asking in the first place, but it may be a very necessary thing to have. And at that point, I'll end and look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Sharon. I think you have thrown a new perspective on this in terms of the distribution of Forex to the various players. I think as a businessman yourself, I think you were able to give some insights here that we haven't as yet put on the table. But let's move on quickly. I'd hope that we would get about half an hour or 40 minutes for discussion. There were a number of issues raised here. I don't know in what order we need to take them. First of all, maybe we can. I'll check to see if there are questions in the chat box. But we want to start with those who want to ask a question. Let us start with those who have a question. Those who have a question, you can raise your hand, and we will start there. You can put it directly to the presenter. Any particular.
If it is okay, whilst others are organizing their question, I would ask two questions to Vade.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that you mentioned was food security. Now, I looked at the manufacturing sector and I looked at the agricultural sector, and real output per worker in the agricultural sector is 1/10 that in manufacturing. That is the existing data as produced by CSO. So when I hear people say increase agricultural production, I know we have to take that very carefully, because we cannot increase agricultural production as exists. Because if we increase it as exists, it means you are putting more resources into a lower productive sector, and therefore the economy will asymptotically stagnate. So if I could get your views on that, that's one. And I noticed you didn't mention crime. The fundamental obstacle, or one of the fundamental obstacles to economic activity in Trinidad and Tobago, is the crime situation. Be it earning foreign exchange, be it spending foreign exchange, be it growing the non-tradable sector, the crime situation restricts the level of economic activity. And unless we deal with that crime situation, it's going to be a slow pace. And what I want you to take into consideration in your response rate is that natural gas production between 2023 and 2026 is likely to fall even further. So you have a situation where you have crime at, I checked the figures before the seminar. TJ Sheriff posted it at 489 murders. Let's assume it reaches 600 murders this year. So you have 600 murders when your natural gas production is 2681 MMCF on average per day for this year. If it goes down in 2026 to about 2,400, and because natural gas drives everything, economic activity-wise, one wonders what the murder level could go to. And if the murder level escalates even further, then what would happen to economic activity? People would be spending more money trying to stay hiding from the criminals rather than investing in highly productive, investable areas that could yield the type of returns that would generate economic growth. I know I said two, but I have one more, please. You also mentioned something very interesting that I totally agree with, the impact of the Venezuelans. Laissez-faire policy to both the registered and unregistered has led to an increase in the size of the non-tradable sector. It is not being given attention. And it comes, in my understanding, at the cost of greater foreign exchange utilization. And when you add on the greater foreign exchange utilization and you add on the remittances onto that, you end up with a situation that is draining our foreign exchange. I'm not saying that is the cause only of the precipitous decline in foreign exchange. I'm saying you have an abnormal situation emerging in the structure of production, motivated by a change in the factors of production, what we call a Rebrzezinski effect. And therefore, how do we reconcile that? So that's three little questions I posed to you.
Okay, I think
Okay,
Roger, you're asking two questions, right?
Brad, 1 second. Could you just take note of these three questions? Because I think we need to bring in our audience here a bit. If anyone has a question, we take a note of them. I have taken note of Roger's three questions. I'll come back to you straight after. But is there anyone with a question and who will be listening to us? No questions?
Dr. Gonzalez, I'd like to just read one of the questions that has been posted on the chat, and this is for Mrs. Siriram, and the question reads, do you think China's real estate crisis has the potential to weaken its economy, and to what extent will that impact on the Chinese currency? I am also looking at the comment from Mr. Anil Sitaram. Anil, I am not sure if there's a question in there. Perhaps you can, as our chair suggests, unmute your mic and, oh, there isn't a question, it's just a comment, so that's fine. And anyone else from the audience who has a question, you can raise your hand and I will invite you to unmute your mic.
Okay, very good. No other questions? Well, okay, let's go to Ved then to reply to Roger's three questions. And I believe the one from the chat also relates to what Ved was saying about China.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, Ved, go ahead.
Professor, I had trouble hearing, but the first question was the question of efficiency as it applies to agriculture.
Yes,
and
food security, yes. You said food security has a low productivity. Yes, food security has a low productivity.
We cannot use the old methods again. I've been following technological development in the sugarcane industry. And now you have simple things like walk behind cane cutting machines that two persons can cut up to 40 tons a day. Compared to if you leave them on their own, two persons will cut about 4 tons. So there's no question, if you're going back into agriculture, it has to use the most advanced method with appropriate technology. In Trinidad, we like to buy the biggest tractor, we like to buy the biggest machine, we like to buy the biggest processing plant and so on. But I'm focusing on appropriate technology. For example, one person in America can work with appropriate technology and the size of the factory tractors and so on, can work 1,000 acres. Over here, we will need 1,000 persons to work 1 acre. So there's a big difference. So I'm saying, once we train the people and tell them what we expect, agriculture has to be in the most advanced manner if we are to reintroduce it in a serious way. If you can,
Yes.
appropriate technology is extremely important. For another example, if we are setting up a sugar mill, what is the size of the sugar mill? For example, again, a 200 ton a day crushing capacity is just 100,000 US dollars. We don't have to go and buy 100 million plant. We don't. So if we source the appropriate technology, we can put together a very efficient agricultural sector. A professor from the university explained to me that our production of cocoa per acre is 115 times, sorry, 15%. That's about 1/6 of what the production should be. So I'm saying we cannot just go back into agriculture the old way. We have to do it in a very modern way, pay appropriately, and give them the protection and build those industries so that we can have import substitution, that we do not need US dollars. If you could repeat the second.
Yeah, the second one was about crime. Yeah, the second question was about crime, the impact of crime. Yeah.
Yeah, what I heard Roger saying is that the correlation between crime and the price of gas. Am I right?
Not the price, the production. I was just making a comparative statement.
Yeah, no. Listen, it's an interesting observation that it'll be difficult for me to answer, because if we do get a good correlation, we can say, look, the best way to reduce murders and crime and so on is to get the price up, or the production up. But it really reflects the money is available to spend on social issues, training the population, and giving them opportunities to work, And this is where micro industry comes in, which I made mention in my presentation. Micro industry, we have available. For example, we don't have to have a massive steel plant. There are small crucibles that are available where we have pickers who are actually trying to smelt different minerals, including aluminum and so on. We can gather these people. They're very industrious. Gather them and give them the best facilities available and train them, and they will not look towards crime as an occupation. Put these people into productive work, and that can be done through micro industries.
Okay. What about if the third question he raised was about the impact of Venezuelan labor? How do you see it in terms of foreign exchange?
Yes, I mean, I am convinced it's a major boon and a major burden for Trinidad and Tobago. I'm aware of families here with children who are teenagers. They can't go to school. They're at home. So what is the likelihood of their profession when they get bigger? They're not going back to Venezuela at the moment. What is their profession? I think immigration and new movement of people across the globe is a natural phenomenon. Look, about 2 million Afghanis went to Pakistan and living there 12 years. Look, Pakistan has said, you all have to go back. Those who are not registered have to go back. So I think we have to look at it, accept it, and see what are the best options available for us so that we can put them to productive work and formalize their presence in the country. We can't ignore it then. To ignoring it, and Professor Hussain has been making this point for many years, ignoring it is not an option. Ignoring it is not an option.
Yes, finally, the question about China that was raised by one of the
China,
participants.
China is a very closed society. And the information that's coming out from China is very well monitored and by the government. It is the government who produces statistics for China. Their model, their economic model, is a very dangerous one. For example, they will give each province, we want a 7% growth rate this year. What the provincial government used to do, in fact, some of them are bankrupt now, which is not well known in the West. What they used to do, they used to acquire agricultural lands, change it now, change the land use, and sell it to developers at a huge profit. And that is what was funding, that is, real estate was funding the needs of the provincial government. Real estate has hit a brick wall in China. Real estate traditionally provided 30 to 33% of Chinese GDP. If that has come to a halt, what is going to happen to GDP? But who produces the GDP figures is the Chinese government. So we have to be very careful. And the question was, how will that impact on China? China has many, many problems. The banking problems in China, how the developers fund their business, they take down payments on a house, they buy the land, they start the construction, and they take some of that down payment and buy additional land, and again go and take down payment to build houses. So what is happening? There's a lag in terms of houses available. And the other day, last year, I think, that the depositors, the purchasers of those apartments, they said, where is my property? The time has passed, where is my property? Now, the banks also are giving a high interest rate on deposits, and the banks are not in a position to pay back. So there was a massive rally and protest against the banks. And what the Chinese government did, you have these cards, and we have to be very wary of it. We have these cards that has all your personal data and so on it, and where the Chinese government has access to that. The people from outside the province going to take a bus now to travel to the bank to join the protest, to demand payment. They cannot enter the bus because their card is showing that they have COVID. So we have to be very careful about the digitization and so on, and information in the government centralized, because they change their COVID status, and that's very, very dangerous. So we are not hearing about the banking crisis in China, but banks are folding up. The provincial governments are folding up. They cannot fund it. Whilst China may appear to be as solid as a rock, if you're shut down for 6 months, how can your GDP still grow? So I would be very concerned about the economy of China, because there's going to have a reverberation for all the providers of raw materials, such as Australia, that provide a tremendous amount of steel to China. All those demand is going to dry up and is going to reverberate around the world. Evergrande had US debt, they had external debt, which they fell into default, and Chinese government are not bailing them out like before. So my question to you is that we ought to look at it very closely, the Chinese economy, and expect a decline, but it would not be reported for the simple reason the Chinese government is in control of the data.
Okay, we have some questions here for Mr. Sharon. I believe the first one was about how do SMEs survive in this foreign exchange crisis. I think that is one. I think there's one that also just came up recently. How should the government go about helping SMEs? That's another one. I think that is probably directly directed to Mr. Sharon. I don't know if you want to come in on these two questions, and
yes,
then I'll come back.
I would love to, Professor. So first of all, SMEs will not be able to supply if we don't have access to Forex. And that is just the truth. The reality is that the majority of SMEs in this country import some form of good or the other in order to sell as retail. And that is the business as it will. The larger companies, the larger conglomerates, they do the same thing, but they have other ways of obtaining Forex and so on. The second thing is, what can the government do? Well, the government had started off by saying, you need to become an earner of Forex. And what they had in place was the export TT. Export TT, would help you to find markets, small, and they still do. One of the largest export sectors we have is food and beverage, and many of them are micro, and they're actually growing, and they're finding markets for them, and they're joining with bigger players to actually improve their game, as it were, and get more stuff out there. What the government also did is they said you can access Forex from the Exim Bank. And that's a funny thing, the Exim Bank, because when we talk about, how we measure Forex and how the central bank measures Forex, we talk about commercial banks, we talk about, sales, but I'm not sure that the Forex that goes to the Exim Bank, where does that fall? Where does that fall? Is it counted as Forex that is also bought by the commercial banks, or is it a separate thing altogether? But the government said, if you become a manufacturer, you can access Forex from the thing. But thirdly, what they did was,
I think that's a separate thing altogether. If you make a separate block of money.
right. So they said, we give concessions for you to bring in equipment. And then, strangely enough, for this on this budget, the minister removes the concession. So you have to pay duty and VAT on machinery if you import it. And I checked that today with InvestPT and whatever, and they agreed with me, yes, that was the case. What I also checked today was, what is the availability of space in the e-tech parks? Because Dr. Hussain always talks about e-tech parks playing a very important role, in both, for small business and for that transition. And what has happened in the e-tech parks is that lots are being sold by the acre and the half acre. And the big players have bought out most of these lots. What you are buying in an e-tech park is not a building. It is not a lot with a building on it and different size lots. In other words, you can say, well, you know what, I'm a small retailer and I'm partnering with somebody or I'm trying to transition into becoming an exporter and an earner of Forex. And therefore, when you go to somebody like InvestPT or you go to the government, they say, well, what do you have for me? I hear as a if you're a manufacturer, you have concessions, and they send you to an e-tech park. You have to build your own facility. You have to put up your own warehouse or whatever it is that you're going to store. You're going to use as your manufacturing base. And I feel for a lot of people that wasn't what they expected. But that being said, there's no shortage of property or available plots in the e-tech park. So again, my thing is, I agree that the way forward is to become an exporter. There are many ways to become an exporter, right? It's not an easy thing. It's a scary thing for many people to say, how am I going to get the financing for that? Because that's the next thing. The government provides no finance. What is going to happen is that your financing has to come from the commercial banks, and the commercial banks themselves are the ones who have to look at your business plan and say whether or not I think it's a good idea, or whether or not I think it could float so you can pay back this loan. Or else, do you have enough collateral for me to stake this loan on for you to transition to becoming an exporter? And that is not always an easy. So, but even before we get to that, we're looking at the fact that a lot of the infrastructure the government had put in place has benefited larger manufacturers in terms of their growth, but it has not really benefited small and micro businesses that want to make that transition. And I think now that we realize that our supply of Forex is heavily determined on our supply of natural gas, or new wells that we might find or monetize in as fast a way as possible. And if we look at global events and we read just a couple of days in the papers about what the Republicans are asking of Biden to reimpose sanctions on Maduro because he has, he hasn't really called for the free elections. He said whatever and so on. So that whole deal appears to be kind of falling apart in a sense. What is going to be the situation when it comes to Dragon for us? Because there's so many things staked on Dragon, so many things staked on what Dr. Hussain had presented at a confederation thing the other day about at the confederation post-budget review about Manatee and Calypso and how we can change our fortune. And that could determine whether or not there's enough Forex for anybody. But in the meanwhile, if that doesn't happen, then it's critically important. So who has to take that role? Who has to take the role to shepherd micro and small and medium business from the retail and distributions and the retail sector, as it were, to say, make that transition. I'm helping you to make that transition, or find a way to become an exporter or to become an earner of Forex by some form of fashion. And we can also do that online. You don't have to be a manufacturer. You can set up, hopefully you can set up some sort of online business where you can sell to the region and whatever. But there's always a component of importation, because Mariano Brown has always said that how our manufacturing base is very limited. It's small, it's not wide. It's not like China. I mean, when you look at so many of the basic consumables, when you look at something as simple as a pen and a pencil, when you look at something as simple as clothing, underwear, socks, when you look at something as toiletries and so on, none of those things are manufactured in Trinidad and Tobago. We have manufacturing companies that are doing exceedingly well in Trinidad and Tobago. But what is the range of goods and services that are provided for us to say, if we start to cut imports, can we really supply the needs of citizens and nations? And that's why the other thing that unfortunately may have to happen is we have to have a negative list. Because if we look at that chart that shows the growth of the importation of food and the US that it uses, we cannot really say that we are consuming that much staple food or so on. And when Vade and many other people call for import substitution, that's also important. But then we're going down a road that is not very, that isn't really what you say popular, which is we're going back to the negative list and we're going back to saying import substitution, which means a negative list of some sort of fashion. But it may be the only thing that can be done, as we move through this thing without anything, concrete in place for the future.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Sharon, I want to come back to you, or I'd like you to comment on two related questions that people have asked in the chat. One was about the rent in the E-Tech Park. I think they said the rent is somewhat subsidized and that there is financing available from the Ministry of Finance, the RDF fund for small businesses. But I want first to go to Professor Hossain and ask him, there's a question in the chat that concerns the Caribbean migrants to Trinidad. And I think the participant asks about what about them? Should we take them into account similar to the Venezuelans? I don't know if you want to reply to that. Then I'll go back to, I think there's Ved who wanted to come in, and then we'll go back to Mr. Sharon, and I think we'll more or less round it off around that time. Yes, Professor Hossain?
Okay. So I would comment on that and make my closing comment in one. So the CARICOM nationals that are here are part of the CSME movement as part of the wider CARICOM agreement, and they help to contribute to the growth and development of Trinidad and Tobago in many different ways. The truth is, we have a very small population and we struggle for workers, so that wherever these migrants come from, we need to be thankful for them. We probably need a population with a much larger population as we move forward in order to grow GDP and to generate a different level of economic activity so that firms could benefit from economies of scale. I don't really understand though what the person who asked the question, what direction they are taking. All I would say is that we have an unemployment rate of 3.7% that was quoted, I believe, in the budget. That was for second quarter 2023. If we link that with first quarter 2023, we would see in combination that we have a overall unemployment rate for 2003 of 4.3% overall. And if we take the number of people that are economically inactive, you would see very high numbers in excess of 400,000. Now, economically inactive, you have a particular definition. They are the non-institutionalized population, so the people that is not in schools or in jail or in hospital or anything like that, less the labor force. So people who are eligible to work because they are not institutionalized, but they are not in the labor force, remains as economically inactive. And it's a high number. And what we need to be closely doing is looking at how we can bring that number down. Now, it doesn't mean, let's say it's 400,000 people. It doesn't mean all 400,000 people Professor Gonzalez, are into crime or any specific activity. What we don't know is what these people are doing. And we need to understand what these people are doing. We need to, by understanding what we are doing, we can make the right type of policy interventions to bring them into more meaningful employment and give the economy a better chance. If you look at our pension system in the country, you would see, because the number of people that are formerly paying NIS and these things, it has now been affected by the number of people employed. So we have a situation here that we need to look closely at. Now, the Minister of Finance and other policymakers, they have mentioned the problem. What I don't think people are paying sufficient attention to, very little attention, in fact, is the size of the economically inactive population. And I think it's a fertile place to spend some time. Bring a consultant, let them look at it for the ministry, understand it, characterize it, and put the information in the public domain and look for policy solutions to help fix the labor market. Because if you fix the labor market, you can influence the structure of production and in terms influence the earning of foreign exchange.
Roger, if I may jump in very quickly when you were talking about the economically inactive. And no, Anil, it does not include the homeless. Another thing is, when we look at dealing with crime, we think that the only way to deal with crime is to reduce the number of guns on the yes, homemakers that include to remove the amount of guns on the street. But what we see when we look at the growth of the economically inactive is we're looking at what could possibly be the labor supply to crime. When we look at the videos of those public executions happening, who do we see doing the execution? We see young men doing the execution, and more than one young man. While one man outside with a gun, they have 3 more in a car somewhere that we can't really see, we only see their heads. So what we're looking at is the economically inactive on its own a supply of labor to the criminal underground. So therefore, if we're looking at fixing crime, we can't only look at moving guns off the streets. We have to also look at how do we reduce the supply of youth or supply of labor to the criminal underworld. And that is key. And when we see in that is, as Dr. Hussein, who really was the one who kind of looked at this thing in the beginning, is the growth of the economically inactive. So while on one hand we're seeing, unemployment levels, falling and that sort of thing. On the other hand, that growth in the economically inactive has to signify something. If we look at every year, people after Form 5 and Form 6 leave school. Are you telling me that everybody who leaves school after Form 5, everybody who leaves school after Form 6, including the people that dropped out before, the people that drop out of uni, are finding jobs in Trinidad and Tobago every single year? And the answer to that is no.
Yeah, well, we'll have to take up this question about economically inactive people some other time. It's quite a controversial issue, and we don't know where a lot of these people go. We discuss it a lot. We talk about those who are not, the females who are not working, those who are going in the informal sector. But I wanted to go to Mr. Siram. I think he wanted to make a comment, and could I ask him just to make his final comments? Then I'll come back to you, Mr. Sharan, to answer those 2 points about the rent and the.
Thank you, Professor. With regards to the banks and the distribution of foreign exchange, and this is where we try to deal with it at the Cuba Chamber a few years ago, and the CEOs of the banks actually visited, which we were grateful for. But they bluffed their way through some very, I would say, difficult questions. And I will pose those. I had one slide dealing with it, and Vivek could really say if this is what happens. Is that, first of all, the foreign exchange belongs to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and Central Bank as the agent of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago must ensure a fair and equitable distribution of those FX, foreign exchange. Why I say that? Tomorrow, the central bank could tell all the commercial banks, we are no longer we are withdrawing your license to deal in foreign exchange, and we are going to control it. They can do that, right? So what the banks are doing, just imagine, according to the budget, the national budget, they have 4 billion US dollars abroad, $4 billion not available to the citizens of this Trinidad, not available to the SMEs. $4 billion. Why is that so? Most of that money should come back and serve the citizens and the small businesses of this country. So they must go, central bank must put a cap. If I were, and they have unfettered access to US dollars, which they could convert by TT dollars and put everything abroad in an investment in US treasuries. You're borrowing the TT dollars at less than 1%, putting it in US treasuries at 5%, a spread of 4% on 4 billion is 160 million US dollars multiplied by 7 will give you over $1 billion in profit, that's pre-tax profit to the banks. So they have no incentive in selling US dollars, no incentive. So central bank has to intervene and say there must be a cap on what they can hold and the rest will be available for sale on the local market. The other point, and Vivek could confirm, the commercial banks are saying, I don't have US dollars to sell you, but I have US dollars to lend you. And that is a fraudulent scheme that should be stopped immediately. I've written many times about it because when they are charging you via a loan, they are charging you for FX at $7.50. How can you now compete with the larger other businesses that are buying US dollars at 6.75? You can't. So you all have to get together as a chamber or whatever and make a representation to the central bank and your parliamentarians and the banks to tell them what is your policy. Please stop, cease and desist from those malpractices. You all have to be firm on it. You can't be quiet. You can't know about something wrong and keep quiet about it. So those are two things you all should get going so that the commercial banks will treat you all fairly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Siram. Mr. Sharon, you wanted briefly just to make to give a reply to the two questions about the small businesses do not pay for rent or they pay for subsidized rent in the e-tech.
No, but that is quite correct. They do pay, I think it's $80,000 per annum. So it is subsidized. Okay. What I was really speaking to is what is the availability of plots of land in the e-tech parks. Okay. So the question is, yes, the rent is subsidized. Yes, it can be affordable once you're up and running. I think the upfront cost will be a bit more than that. But that being said, while this thing may have been developed for startups and so on, now there's even more of a need for it. E-tech, if we're asking for people to transition. And if there isn't space, and if the space was then taken up mostly by larger players, because you see what is happening in Trinidad is that the larger businesses are becoming larger. They got a head start in COVID when they remained open and everybody else had to be closed, and small businesses are shrinking, and they are the ones that are most vulnerable at this time. The economic climate, as it were, that has been developed from one budget to the next does not favor SMEs. When we look at what government policy is, any government policy is, let's protect our manufacturers, let's protect local industry, so we put things up like duties and tariffs and that sort of thing for goods coming into the country. But what are you really doing to protect the SME base in Trinidad and Tobago? Right? The SME base is huge. We're not talking about Port of Spain and San Fernando and Chaguanas and areas of commercial activity. We're talking about the SME base is really the impetus for development in all the urban areas in Trinidad and Tobago. Outside of Maine, but not only that, but they are the ones that absorb labor, that absorb most of the unskilled labor in urban areas of Trinidad and Tobago. So that is key as well too. So and then the other thing that they were asking was about help and assistance and so on.
Yeah, financing from the ministry, yes.
Right. What has happened is there is some financing, but what has happened is the government has really cut the amount of people working in InvestTT, and they've cut the amount of people working in I think Export TT and a couple, because they plan on merging. So what happens is that a lot of so they're much smaller in size, much smaller in number, and then their task becomes greater because there are more people now going to them asking for assistance and asking for help. And there's only so much that can be handled at the same time. So that in itself, so you see, and then another key thing is this. So yes, you're saying that there's financing available, but conflicting policies are not helping the situation. So whereas the government is saying, become an exporter or become an earner of forex, let's say earner of forex. And then you're saying, we had concessions on machinery and so on coming in. It was removed in the last budget. So now there are no concessions. So now you have to pay duty and VAT and that. Together with, the rest of your fixed costs and some of your variable costs increasing for small and medium businesses. So how does that help the situation? If the minister had said, listen, we understand that for machinery that is coming in over $500,000 or over $375,000, you will pay back. But any machinery coming in, which is small machinery and so on, coming in under a certain level, you will not pay VAT on that, or the duties will be reduced on that. Then that would help the situation, right? But as it is now, it is, to transition or to create a manufacturing startup in Trinidad and Tobago for a small or micro business is not an easy thing. Right, so the government should relook at their policy and saying, how can we once more again create the conditions that could nurture that transition or nurture small and medium startups in terms of manufacturing in the country.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have touched on a subject which would take us much more time. We don't really have the time. We already, I believe, about half an hour over our time. So we need to bring it to an end. I want, on behalf of TEDU, to thank all of you for participating in this discussion tonight. The panelists who did very excellent presentations and triggered off a very interesting debate. We don't have the time for that debate, but another time we hope to take up some of these issues. Let me thank TEDU again for inviting all of us, and I do look forward to continuous discussions on this and other subjects related to the sustainability question that TEDU has raised. I don't know, Rebecca, if you would want to say anything before we end.
Hi, Dr. Gonzalez. I just want to say thank you very much to all of our panelists and to all of you who decided to join us on a Friday evening for this necessary conversation. Look out for more conversations to come. Clearly, we saw tonight that we merely scratched the surface of the challenge of foreign exchange and the way in which this issue is integrated into every part of our life. So we look forward to the ongoing conversation. Again, thank you to each one of you all. Stay safe, and we will see you at the next session. Good night, everyone.
Yes.